Bobby Lee Claremont and the Criminal Element by Jeannie Mobley. Memphis, Tennessee, 5:02 p.m. Despite Malcolm's scowl, I was flying high when I left Bugeaud. $20 in my pocket and 180 more when we got to Chicago. And even though I hadn't learned who was at the party, I was getting a clearer understanding of things. Or at least, I was starting to form better questions. Malcolm had said the Cajun Queen had connections that kept the good times flowing. Judging from the newspaper headline I had folded in my pocket, I was sure those good times were being produced in Chicago. And Jimmy Halloran was from Chicago. The way Malcolm had hedged when I asked about Bugeaud's connections, I was sure Jimmy was the one at the Cajun Queen with connections to the Chicago's bootleg industry. It had to be more than a coincidence that Kelly had been visiting Jimmy from Chicago at the time of Jimmy's murder. And the way Malcolm had warned me about Kelly had to be part of the bootleg connection, didn't he? He was probably the one Jimmy was dealing with. But did that mean he was also involved in Jimmy's death? What would he have to gain by Jimmy being dead? Then again, maybe he wasn't involved at all. It was mighty suspicious that Bugeaud had recruited me to tell Sergeant Hayworth that Jimmy's death had been an accident. If someone else had killed his partner, it seemed to me Bugeaud would want that someone caught. As best I could figure, the only thing that ever stood between Bugeaud and owning the entire Cajun Queen was Jimmy. Bugeaud had told me he didn't want the Cajun Queen to himself, that Jimmy was the life of the place. But what if those were just pretty words? If Bugeaud loved and spent money like Malcolm said, he might have needed Jimmy out the way and the club's profits all to himself. All to himself, that is, if Nanette got her insurance money and signed the club over to him. I was a little worried by what Bugeaud had said, if things went according to plan. Was there more to it than just convincing the insurance company Nanette and Jimmy were married? I recalled how Sergeant Hayworth had tried to point a finger at Nanette, too, when he and I first spoke. But even after all I'd learned, I was still sure she was innocent. She was just on the way to Chicago, looking for the best possible life for her son. I had a hard time believing she had anything to do with the schemes of her acquaintances. Thinking on this, I felt a little guilty about taking $20 from Bugeaud, the man who might have killed the love of her life. So I vowed that once I knew what exactly had happened to Jimmy, I would use Bugeaud's money not just for my benefit, but for Nanette's too. I could protect her if I knew who to protect her from. And who knows, protecting her might be worth a chunk of change to Kelly or Bugeaud too, assuming one of them wasn't heading off to jail. The conductor was walking through the cars to announce our approach to Memphis, only 5 minutes away. So I hurried forward to see what Leon and Terrance had learned in the baggage car. The colored lounge car was nearly empty. Folks had all gone back to their seats to get ready for the stop in Memphis, so I passed through to the passenger car beyond. It was shabby and suffocating. My gut twisted as I breathed in the hot air smelling of unwashed bodies and coal smoke, which was being sucked in through the open window since we were so close to the engine. How could folks ride all the way to Chicago like this? And why did they have to when there was space in the car I was in? Would it hurt anything if colored folks could get a decent seat on a train? I wondered with annoyance. I squinted and craned my neck, but there was a sea of people crowded into the stiff wooden seats or standing in the aisles, and I couldn't see a couple of boys in all that. I stepped forward, intending to walk through to look for them, but an old man in a porter's uniform blocked my way. His dark face was lined with wrinkles, and his hair and eyebrows were pure white with age. He shuffled out of his booth and stood before me, trying to straighten his stooped spine enough to look imposing. "Can I help you, sir? I think you might be looking for a car back yonder," he said, pointing a gnarled finger back the way I had come. Back toward the nicer part of the train where the white folks were, where the seats were more comfortable and the engine smoke and cinders weren't blowing in on the travelers. "I'm looking for two boys I met earlier, Terrance and Leon. I think they'd be sitting up here," I said, still scanning the passengers for any sign of the boys. The old porter's face registered worry, bordering on fear. "Did these boys cause you trouble, sir?" I looked at him and realized he must be their granddaddy. "No, not at all. They're friends of mine," I said. "Friends?" His eyebrows raised. Why did it always have to raise suspicion? White kids and colored kids acting friendly. I looked him square in the eye. "Yes, sir. I met them while I was eating lunch." The porter frowned at me but nodded once. "So you're the boy I've been hearing about. If you'll wait back yonder, I'll see what I can do," he said, pointing me toward the lounge car. I was happy enough to go. Being conspicuous made me feel plenty nervous at the best of times, and being the only white face in the colored folks' less than equal car made me feel downright naked. I didn't wait long before Leon and Terrance showed up. "Well," I said, "did you find the insurance policy? Did you learn anything?" "Shh," Leon said, glancing around us. The lounge car was empty except for one young fellow wiping down the counters. Leon leaned close to me, and Terrance followed suit. "Looks like they're all traveling light except Mrs. O'Halloran," Leon whispered. "She's the only one with any baggage in the baggage car. She's got a trunk and 2 suitcases." "Because she's planning to move to Chicago for good," I said. "The others are just seeing her off. Did you look in her trunk?" Leon nodded. "Nothing. Just a lot of fancy clothes and shoes and perfume." "She's a proper lady," Terrance said, smiling. "I never saw so many lacy underthings." Leon blushed. "You were supposed to be keeping a lookout, not ogling her underthings," he said. "What did you find, Bobby Lee?" Terrance asked. "Jimmy O'Halloran was definitely murdered," I said, and I repeated what Malcolm told me about the bolts on the balcony. "How'd Malcolm know?" Leon asked. "Do you think he did it?" "I doubt it. Why would he tell me Jimmy was murdered if he was the one who did it?" "So Bugeaud's the killer, then?" Terrance asked. "I'm not sure. Bugeaud had a good reason to kill Jimmy. They owned the Cajun Queen Supper Club together, and he'd have had all the profits to himself without Jimmy, so long as he can get Nanette out of the way. Plus, he's nervous as a cat." "That don't prove anything," Leon said. "I'd be nervous, too. If he's not the killer, that still means someone killed his partner. That would make me downright jumpy." I nodded. "Yeah, but still, it's plenty clear he's trying to hide something. He offered me money to be his stooge to the police. Look." I showed them the $20 he'd given me. I knew it wasn't smart, but I couldn't resist. I'd never had so much money before. Obviously, from the looks on their faces, they hadn't either. Leon whistled. Terrance tried to whistle, but with the gap where his front teeth should be, it came out as a sloppy, wet sound that left little sprinkles of spit on the table. "So you're working for the crook now?" Leon said. I admit, I liked the way that sounded. Working for a crook made me a crook, too. Maybe, maybe not. There's that Brian Kelly fella, too. He's from Chicago. And Jimmy's connections for booze had to be in Chicago. "You mean gangsters?" I nodded again. If O'Halloran was dealing with the Chicago mob, Kelly might not be a friend at all. He might have been sent to New Orleans to kill Jimmy. "But why?" Terrance asked. I shrugged. "I don't know what the Chicago mob needs much of a reason, but so far, I don't know that they had any reason at all." The train whistle blew to indicate our approach to the station. "Well," Leon said, grinning, "we'll find out soon. I bet the murder weapon is in either Bugeaud's or Kelly's suitcase." "There's no murder weapon. He fell out a window," I said. "That was just a matter of convenience. If Kelly came down to Louisiana to kill Jimmy, he'll have a murder weapon," Leon said. "Gangsters don't go nowhere without their heaters," Terrance said, suddenly an expert. I wasn't so sure about their logic. I didn't much figure a gun in someone's suitcase was going to prove anything. And anyway, they hadn't found anything like that in the baggage car, so I didn't see the point. "We're coming into Memphis, you know," Leon said. "The train will change cars there, so it's a long stop. Most folks will be getting off for lunch and to stretch their legs. It's a perfect chance for you to go through the bags they got with them at their seats. I stared at Leon in disbelief. I can't do that. What if I get caught? Be the same as if we got caught, Leon said, giving me the eye. And Terrance and me can't do it. We ain't allowed in the whites-only car. Are you a chicken, Bobby Lee? I ain't a chicken, I said, knowing I'd been caught in my own device. But what about the car's porter? Does he leave the carriage unattended? We can distract him, Terrance said. Chelton's a friend of Granddaddy's. Okay, I'll check their things, but you two have to keep an eye out. If Kelly is a gangster, he'll kill us if he catches us. Gangsters don't scare me, Terrance said, sitting up straight and squaring his skinny shoulders, which just made him look even smaller in his oversized shirt. You ever met a gangster? I asked him, trying hard to keep a straight face. No, he said. I ain't scared of nobody. You are so, Leon said. You're scared of the dark, and spiders, and ghosts. Terrance's shoulders slumped a little, but his fierce expression didn't falter. Those ain't people, he said. People don't scare me. Well, you might want to be afraid of Kelly and Bugeaud, I said. If they'd killed a fellow with a wife and baby, I doubt they'd be all that worried about killing any of us. Which one was Kelly, anyway? Terrance asked. The Yankee who talked down to Clovis, Leon said, his teeth clenching as he thought about it. Listen, Bobby Lee, we'll make sure Shelton's distracted. Then we'll stand around by the train and make sure the others don't get back on early. If one of them comes along, we'll give you a signal and then stall them as long as we can. What kind of signal? I asked. I can hoot like an owl, Terrance suggested. I rolled my eyes. You can't stand around in the Memphis Depot hooting. Folks'll think you're a lunatic. The brakes screeched and we all rocked forward in our seats as we came into the station. Get on back there to your seat and open the window, Leon said. Then we'll stand near it to keep watch. And if one of them comes back before you're done, we'll bang on the side of the train car. Understand? Sure, I agreed. And once we roll out of Memphis, come on up here, nice and casual like, and tell us what you found. I agreed and hurried back to my car on the train, just as the brakes let out a last big puff of steam and she came to rest. Some folks bundled up their packages and hurried away with purpose. Others left their things behind and strolled away at a more leisurely pace. Sergeant Hayworth was one of the leisurely strollers. His hands were stuffed into his pockets, and he was whistling as he walked up the aisle to the forward door. He gave me a little smile and nod as he passed. I nodded back, trying to look innocent. I took my time opening the window and collecting my belongings, while Nanette and her companions gathered up their things. I wanted to make sure they were all long gone before I started pawing through their luggage. Nanette O'Halloran took the baby from his basket, and Mr. Kelly offered to carry some of the baby's things. I watched him closely as he did. He exhibited none of the tenderness of a true lover, nor the smooth flattery of a hopeful suitor. If he was after a prize, it wasn't her affection. When she had the baby on her shoulder, the group left the car together. I stepped off, too, from the front entrance while they took the back. I'd planned to just loiter near the train until I was sure they were gone, then slip back on. But as soon as Mrs. O'Halloran and Mr. Kelly moved off through the crowd, Alphonse Bugeaud waved me to him. This is where you start earning your pay, Mr. Claremont, he said. He pointed toward the retreating figures of Mr. Kelly and Mrs. O'Halloran. Follow those two. I want to know everything Kelly is saying to her. Got it? I thought you were paying me to tell your story to the cops. I'm paying you to do as I say, Bugeaud said. 200 is a lot of cash. It's time for you to earn it. I hesitated, but couldn't think of any way to say no. So with a meaningful glance and shrug toward Leon, who was hovering near the baggage car helping with the luggage and keeping an eye on me, I set out to tail Mr. Kelly and Mrs. O'Halloran. They had already disappeared off the platform and into the crowded station, so I had to hurry. Unlike the rustic clapboard depots in the small towns we passed through, Memphis had a large modern station, all brick and echoing tile on the inside. A swarm of white folks moved through the whites-only waiting room, past its rows of wooden benches toward the triple doors that opened out into the street. I joined the crowd, glad for Mrs. O'Halloran's distinctive widow's weeds that made her stand out. Outside, the street was busy. Cars and buggies were picking up and dropping off passengers and luggage. Dozens of pedestrians waited on the corner as a streetcar clanged by, then surged across the road to a row of shops and restaurants on the other side. Mrs. O'Halloran and Mr. Kelly were already crossing the street when I stepped out. I waited on my side of the street. Mr. Bugeaud had wanted me to find out what Mr. Kelly was saying to her, but I didn't see how I could get close enough to listen without being seen. And if I was seen, they wouldn't say anything secretive. Traffic whizzed by on the street while a new crowd of people pooled on the corner. I waited and watched my quarry stroll slowly along the sidewalk opposite, gazing in windows as they went. At last, traffic cleared and the mass of people spilled off the curb and across the street. For a moment, I lost sight of the couple, but the crowd dispersed when we reached the sidewalk and I spotted them. I set off in their direction, examining things in windows as they were doing, trying to move gradually closer to them in a way they wouldn't notice. I glanced in their direction from time to time, checking whether I'd been seen. When it appeared I hadn't, I worked closer still, close enough to hear them if they'd been talking. They seemed, however, to have nothing to say. Mrs. O'Halloran, the baby turned up over her shoulder, was looking at hats and gloves and other fine things in the windows, and Mr. Kelly was looking bored. I was outside a candy store, 2 shops down from them, when I accidentally made eye contact with the baby. He cooed and wriggled in his mother's grasp. Then he let out a happy screech. I darted into the candy store as Nanette and Kelly both turned to look. I had been lucky it was a candy store and not a china shop. It looked natural for a kid to go into a candy store, so even if they saw me, they wouldn't necessarily think I was following them. At least, I hoped they wouldn't. Normally, I wouldn't have wasted my money on something as useless as candy. But I was there now, and I might need to prove I had gone in for a purpose. Besides, with my newfound wealth, I could splurge a little on a treat. So I went to the counter and asked for 3 scoops of the penny candy from the jars. 1 for me, 1 for Leon, and 1 for Terrance. The board clerk took his time getting out the little paper bag and filling it for me. Then he was even slower making change for my dime. By the time I could return to the window at the front of the store and look out, Mrs. O'Halloran and Mr. Kelly had disappeared. Cautiously, I stepped outside, looking in both directions. Nothing. Apparently, they had stepped into a store as well. I started walking once again. I figured I could just keep glancing in windows until I spotted them. I passed a shoe store and a millinery shop where I felt foolish looking in the window at the ladies' hats and gloves. No sign of them. Ahead of me, across an alley, there was a 5 and dime store, which seemed like a likely place to find them. Feeling hopeful, I picked up my pace as I crossed the alley. I was halfway across when someone grabbed the collar of my jacket from behind, yanking me roughly into the alley and behind a row of trash cans. Before I could utter more than a yelp of surprise, I was thrown up against a brick wall. My head slammed against it hard. The breath lifted my lungs. My ears rang and the edges of my vision filled with sparks. Hands gripped the lapels of my shirt and gave me a shake, and Brian Kelly's face came into focus, a cigarette dangling between his lips, and he leaned in so close to me I could feel the heat of it on my face. "What do you think you're doing, kid? Huh? Just what do you think you're doing?" I couldn't form a single word. My head was throbbing. "Answer me!" He gave me a hard shake, and my head banged against the wall again. "Nothing," I managed to choke out. He gave a grunt of disbelief, spewing cigarette smoke into my face. Then he released my collar with one hand and began to pat along my body with it. In my jacket pocket, he found the silver cigarette case I'd helped myself to earlier. "Nothing, huh? Looks like I've caught me a pickpocket." "I gotta make my way in the world somehow," I said, hopeful that if he thought I was a harmless pickpocket, he'd let me off the hook, or better yet, praise my criminal skills. He reached back into the same pocket and pulled out the scrap of newspaper I'd carried with me from home. Cold amusement curled the corner of his lip, making the cigarette tip rise. "What's this? You keeping track of business in Chicago?" Ain't much money in picking pockets, I said, trying to sound cool and collected, despite being pinned to a wall by his meaty fist. Cool in the face of adversity was an important skill, and it had occurred to me this might be my job interview. I'm looking for some new opportunities. Is that right? He said, dropping the newspaper and going back to searching my clothes for something more interesting. His eyebrows rose when he heard the $20 bill crinkle. Well, well, he said, pulling it from my pocket and waving it in front of my face. And what opportunity was this? I shrugged. In return, he gave me another hard shake, another bang on the head. The goose egg that had been forming there split, and a warm trickle of blood seeped along my scalp toward my neck. Who gave this to you? The cop? I shook my aching head. Bugeaud. Bugeaud? Why? You were there when he made the offer, I said. Yeah, not to talk to the cop. So why are you following me? The jig was up. I could see that lying to him would only get me roughed up worse. I don't know. He didn't say, but if there's any... Kelly gave me one more hard shake. This time he released my collar, and when I banged against the wall, I slid down it, leaving a trail of blood and hair along the rough brick. I sat still, dazed and aching, my legs sprawled out before me on the dirty pavement. Kelly towered over me. He pocketed my $20, but under the circumstances, I decided not to protest. So Bugeaud's bought you to do his business, has he? He growled. Well, tell Bugeaud that I'll take care of Nanette. He doesn't need to worry about her. He'd better start worrying about saving his own worthless hide instead. You tell him that for me. He took one last long drag from his cigarette. Then he dropped it between my sprawled feet and crushed it out with his foot. And one more thing, kid. You might start thinking the same thing for yourself. Without warning, he swung his foot, catching me square between the legs. I crumpled over in pain as he strode away. As I lay behind the trash cans, I heard the bell jingle on the 5 and dime store, then Nanette's voice. Sorry that took me so long. What were you doing in the alley? Just having a smoke and watching a rat in the trash, he said. Did Bobby Lee ever come along from the candy store? Nah, he must not have seen us. Oh, that's a shame. I would have liked to treat him to something at the soda fountain. He's been so kind, Nanette said in her gentle voice. Oh, you know kids. He's probably making himself sick on sweets. Shall we get back to the train? Kelly said. Their footsteps faded away as I lay there in the alley, wishing I were dead.